gambling from an ethical perspective, all right? Gambling from an ethical perspective. And I think we're all feeling the needs of having a biblical perspective on gambling. Gambling is becoming more and more pervasive in our culture, right? So it's not, and when you think about 60s, 70s, 80s, you think about the casinos, and then you start thinking about the state-run lotteries. And that's all still around, except now the majority of gambling is done on your phone with sports betting and different kind of apps, and it is pervasive. So how are we as Christians to think about it? So first, let's establish a basic definition of gambling. The dictionary definition of gambling, Merriam-Webster, says that the gambling is the practice of risking money or other stakes in a game or bet. A little more fuller definition comes from the Irish Reformed Presbyterian Church, and they define gambling like this, and I thought this was helpful. Gambling is an act by which one party consciously risks money or other stakes in the hope of gaining at someone else's expense without giving anything of value in return. Okay, that's the idea of gambling. To flesh it out just a little more, Phil Johnson, writing about gambling, says that when we think of gambling, four components are necessary. And what these components do is they separate gambling from risk, right? There is risk that is good and faithful and godly, but if they separate gambling from risk, they separate gambling from things like investing in the stock market or investing in businesses. And these four factors, when put together, they also separate gambling from things like the insurance industry. Okay, so that's why they're important. I'll just read them off to you. He says, one, that something valuable is put at risk. Two, something belonging to someone else is at stake as a prize. Three, an element of chance is involved in determining the outcome. And four, this is a very important one, this is new to the definitions we've read. Four, no new wealth is created in the process. No new wealth is created in the process. Now, I know that we'll need some time even to digest that definition, but we'll have these notes somewhere available to you guys. But let me just make give you three ethical considerations about gambling. First, gambling is dangerous. First ethical, to frame our thinking, ethical consideration. Gambling is dangerous. Now, this does not mean that it is categorically unethical, right? There are many things in life that are dangerous. Some of the gifts of God, because of our sinful hearts, they're dangerous. Alcohol could be dangerous. Sex could be dangerous, right? In a broken and fallen sinful world, we need to be on guard about these things. Now, given that, I'm going to read a quote to you from an ethicist named Daniel Heimbeck. He writes this: all Christians agree it is wrong to gamble covetously or in ways that compromise worship, discourage gainful work, or interfere with marriage, family, or community responsibility, right? And so he's saying, as a baseline, you need to acknowledge that with gambling comes these dangers to view work a certain way, dangers for addiction, dangers for covetousness. Now, that doesn't outright make gambling unethical, but what it does, brothers and sisters, is that it encourages us, in terms of application, encourages us to have a sober vigilance when it comes to gambling. And I think as a baseline, this goes a long way for our churches and for our discipleship relationships when we think about how to care for one another. That gambling does present unique dangers. And so we should be vigilant for everything that may be associated with it. So that's one consideration. Gambling is dangerous. Second consideration, gambling is unwise. Gambling is unwise. And here I think we're moving an ethical step forward, okay? So what I'd like to argue is that many, and maybe all forms of gambling develops an unwise and unbiblical instincts in the soul, okay? Gambling develops unwise and non-biblical instincts in the soul. 3 unbiblical instincts that gambling develops. Number 1, gambling divorces the reward of financial gain from work. All right? So in the mind of someone who's because of their practice, because even for some people, a lifestyle of gambling, there's a divorce between financial gain and work. Psalm 128:2, we read, "You shall eat the fruit of the labor of your hands. You shall be blessed, and it shall be well with you." For God, the blessed life, the life that respects and brings him glory, is when our work produces gain, where purposeful work produces gain. One pastor writes this. He says, "Any practice that trains the heart to crave money apart from faithfulness is spiritually dangerous, regardless of whether someone occasionally wins." You see, it's okay, and in fact, it's God-honoring for us to want to be productive. It's okay and it's God-honoring for us to want to provide for our families. Money in and of itself is not a bad thing, right? It's the love of money that's condemned. It's covetousness that's condemned. And when gambling divorces money from work, it tends to produce those instincts that lead a person down a dangerous path. Second instinct, gambling cultivates a zero-sum worldview. Gambling cultivates a zero-sum worldview, and that simply means that we start thinking of our relationships in terms of, if someone wins, I lose, right? Because that's the case in gambling. If someone wins, I lose. There is no new wealth created by a casino, right? There is no new wealth created at a poker game. So somebody wins and someone loses. And what happens is, when that kind of worldview is created, it eats away at Christian virtues like generosity, like love, like contentment. Because now we're viewing everyone as an obstacle. Proverbs 22:16, Solomon says this, "Whoever oppresses the poor to increase his own wealth or gives to the rich will only come to poverty." Now notice what's not condemned. Gaining is not condemned. Increasing your own wealth is not condemned. That can be a God-honoring thing. It's increasing your own wealth when you oppress someone else that's condemned. And that's what the zero-sum worldview does. And the third unbiblical instinct is that gambling cultivates a reliance upon chance and fortune. Excuse me. In the mind of a gambler, chance, luck, and fortune begin to have a life of its own. It becomes an entity. It becomes something you rely on, you appeal to. It becomes something you're grateful to. It becomes a very real, though unseen, idol. But and sisters, from a biblical perspective, there is no such thing as chance or luck or fortune. There is only the sovereignty and providence of God. And so might it be that it is utterly foolish for us to participate in something that at least when unchecked, can start to form an idol in our life. First consideration, gambling is dangerous. Second, gambling is unwise. And here the application is that we need to be wise about everything in life, right? So if we know that there are scriptural principles that are going to protect us from this foolish pattern of thinking, we need to proactively be applying it. This is another thing, brothers and sisters, I think for our discipleship relationships, for our churches, is not only to acknowledge that there's dangers associated with gambling, but just to have principles and teach on principles and talk about principles that will make gambling less and less appealing, that will make it less and less satisfying to the soul. Third consideration, and this one is gambling is a sin. Gambling is a sin. Now, brothers and sisters, Christians disagree on this. All right? Some Christians who think gambling is a sin will disagree on this particular argument that gambling is a sin. I personally go back and forth whether this argument works or not. All right? But I'd like to offer it for your consideration as you're thinking through these issues. This is an argument from William MacLeod. He writes the following: gambling breaks the 8th commandment. The 8th commandment is, thou shalt not steal. Gambling is an attempt to get material gain without paying the price. So the way he's defining theft is that theft is the unjust acquisition of goods and property. Theft is you acquiring things you have no right to. Okay? Now, I'm sure all kinds of objections are popping up. He continues, and he says, Paul wrote, if a man will not work, neither shall he eat. It is work and responsibility that develop character and prepare for the future. We should not be taking something for which we cannot give value in return. The gambler who wins is a thief, even as he who steals your wallet is a thief. Just because the gambler is protected by law or a gentleman's agreement does not make him any less a thief. You still may have questions. He continues. One more quote. He says, for many years, we have had laws against dueling, even if, you guys know what dueling is, right? You shoot one another to settle a score. For many years, we've had laws against dueling, even if both parties agree to it. When someone dies in a duel, it becomes murder by common consent, but it is nonetheless murder. So gambling is robbery by common consent and breaks the 8th commandment. So the conclusion that MacLeod comes to is the one who wins while gambling is stealing, and the one who loses has tried to steal but just failed miserably. That's the ethical landscape. And brothers and sisters, if we come to that conclusion, then we should not gamble. Now, how to conclude, or how should you conclude on this? Brothers and sisters, consider these things. Go to the Word. See if these principles are so. Pray. Ask for God's wisdom. We might end in slightly different places, but understanding the landscape, the moral, ethical questions, will go a long way to blessing our churches. For me personally, I think that the first premise that gambling is dangerous is provable. I think it is empirically provable. The second principle, that gambling is unwise, I think is true, and it affects our soul. And the third principle, that gambling is a sin, I think at the very least is probable. Now, I am not the Holy Spirit. I am not your conscience. Brothers and sisters, we're going to have to think deeply about this, because this isn't going away. Everyone has a smartphone. I think a statistic I read recently said that over 60% of our generation gambles. 60%. And it's going to be higher and higher as it goes. Let's think wisely about this. Thank you.